What if you could help others to find the power to heal themselves? Physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
When I started teaching my classes, it was in 2002, and I was just doing the past life regressions and contacting the subconscious part. But then as the time went on and we found how powerful this was and what we could do with it, a lot of the students began saying, you know, advanced past life regression doesn't really tell what it's all about. This is so much more than that. We think you should change the name. So it was a few years ago we decided to change the name to Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. And this is the healing technique that we've now been teaching it, well, since 2002, that's 12 years.
What if you could time travel with them? Visit mythical places or angelic realms, other worlds, other galaxies. Help others to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT, and now you can learn her method by going directly to dolorescannon.com. And don't forget to mention the discount code MORETALKS.
Established over 100 years ago, Watkins Books is one of the world's oldest and leading independent bookshops specializing in esoterica. We have the widest selection of esoteric books in the UK, and our friendly and knowledgeable staff are here to assist you in a unique ambience of our shop. So come and visit us in the heart of London as we're open every day.
The More Show is supported by Mindscape, Paranormal and UFO Matrix magazines, available for download on all major digital platforms. The comments and views expressed on The More Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the view of Kevin Moore, The More Show, or this radio station and its affiliate or sponsors. This show is for entertainment purposes only.
Broadcasting from the UK and across the world online. You're now watching the UK's only alternative late night talk show, and I'm your host, Kevin Moore. For the next hour, I'll be covering subjects that will open up your mind and provide you with information you may have never heard before. On today's show, I'm joined with Paul Blake Smith, who was born and raised in MO41's hometown of Cape Girardeau, Missouri. He attended Southeast Missouri State University in Cape, where he was a 4-year mass communications major with an English minor. Paul lives and works in Western Missouri, working on other books and movie screenplays. He joins me today to discuss his latest book, MO41 The Bombshell Before Roswell, the case of a Missouri 1941 UFO crash. Now, his book examines in detail the facts, rumors, clues, and existing evidence of an alien spacecraft crash landing on a farm outside Cape Girardeau, Missouri in mid-April 1941. Paul Blake Smith, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on. It's a chance to not only promote my book, but I like rewarding people who take a positive outlook on various aspects of life, and that's what your show is about.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Thank you. I hope I did you justice in the intro there. That was a bit of a tongue tie, that intro was. In the intro as well, I mentioned MO41. Just for the audience, what is MO41?
It stands for Missouri, 1941, just an abbreviation so you know what incident we're talking about in America. We have Roswell, which happened in New Mexico in 1947. But in many ways, I feel this story overshadows Roswell, and it has a bigger impact, in just my opinion, perhaps.
Yes, absolutely. Now, thank you for your kind words at the beginning of the show, and I'm straight back to you as well in the sense of what the work you've done to dig this case out. Absolutely incredible. I've never heard of it before. Many of our listeners will never have heard of this before. This is going to be so interesting. So, where do we start? Now, actually, with the intro as well. I'm guessing that your family was well connected in society in Cape Girardeau as well.
My grandfather was the city attorney for many years. One of his best friends was a man named Rush Limbaugh I. His son, Rush Limbaugh II, was a father to my friend, and the famous broadcaster Rush Limbaugh. When I was a boy, he was my Little League umpire in baseball in town, and he was then known as Rusty Saw, or Rusty Limbaugh. He was a local radio DJ who needed extra money in the summertime, so he would umpire baseball games in the park. I have never really met him as an adult, though, I'm afraid.
That's incredible. So with that, even with that connection, and with being brought up there as well in Cape Girardeau, I'm going to keep saying it because I think I've got the name right. Am I saying it right? Yes.
I've heard many creative interpretations, but Cape Girardeau is how we pronounce it here in Missouri.
Good. Did you ever come across this story? Was it ever talked about?
Believe it or not, I did not hear it till I became an adult. It began to pick up steam in the 1990s. A woman named Charlotte Huffman Mann wrote a letter to a UFO investigator and said, "This is what happened in our family. I really feel the need to pass this story along. It's just amazing." And so the UFO investigator did a little work, and he passed it along to another investigator, who in turn passed it to another one. And after a while, it began to appear in chapters of books, and it soon made its way to about 2 minutes worth of airtime on a science fiction channel documentary here in America, and that's when it really took off. I first learned the story in the late 1990s, and I think some people in Cape Girardeau are still not familiar with it to this day. I'm doing the best I can to talk about it. The word is spreading, partly through my book and a website and a Facebook page. I know my own stepmother said she heard this story in the 1960s when she was going to high school. So it's been around. Some people know and some people don't have a clue.
Right, the 1960s. Okay. What made you want to research this case and produce this book, which is a fantastic book? But what drove you?
I totally agree. No, it started to be talked about on the radio, and you would find little tidbits on the internet, in cyberspace, and a few book chapters in UFO books made a brief reference to it. And I'm sitting here thinking, I'm from Cape Girardeau, and I would like a whole book on this. Where can I go? Well, no one's got one. And I thought, someone needs to write a book on this. Well, wait a minute, I'm somebody. Maybe I could do it. So I tried, and I think I have succeeded. I've got some good reviews, and I'm pleased to have people give me a little more information since the book came out. And it is a very exciting and very intriguing topic, isn't it?
Oh,
as we get into it, we'll see.
Just a bit. I mean, it almost seems impossible to have approached for yourself, because not only are most of the witnesses obviously passed on, it was so well sealed up. I mean, it was just, where the heck did you start?
Not only are all the witnesses deceased, but in many cases their children are deceased. So if they did tell the story, even the children have passed on. It was 75 years ago this month. I began writing to an author who had a little tidbits in his book, and he said he went to Cape Girardeau and looked here and there, couldn't find any physical evidence, but he made a little headway in the book. So I thought I'll start adding on bits of information and talking to people myself. And that included a man who works right here in the apartment building where I live. Turns out he is also from Cape Girardeau, and he heard the story many years ago too. And I hear those kinds of stories now and then, people who have first or second-hand knowledge. So I really began to dig into this by going to the church where the original source worked. His name was Reverend William Huffman, and he worked as a Christian minister in Cape Girardeau, and he was well thought of, and I started from there.
Okay, okay, and when you said earlier on that a Huffman family member came forward to want to talk about the story, that would have been the son of Reverend Huffman.
In this case, it was the granddaughter, Charlotte
Oh.
Huffman Mann. She was with her grandmother in the early 1980s when the grandmother was sadly dying of cancer. And she said, "Grandma, I remember hearing little whispered rumors about this story, and I've seen a photograph related to the story. Can you tell me the whole story?" The Huffman grandparents did not want to talk about it, but slowly, reluctantly, the whole thing came out. The grandmother passed away, and the granddaughter took a number of years to write it down, and then finally, in the early 90s, sent it to a UFO investigator.
And did you ever get to meet her?
I did not get to meet her. I exchanged a letter with her. She gave me more information. The problem, if you want to call it that, is she's told everything there is to tell, and there simply isn't much more. I was just barely able to squeeze a few little bits of data out, but she's told everything that she knows about what her grandfather came home and said one night in April of 1941. He said, "I'm going to tell you this story, and then I'm never going to speak of it again." And apparently this man lived up to his word.
And is she still with us?
Yeah, she lives in Texas.
Okay, and when you mentioned Texas, and when you mentioned a photo there, what are you referring to there?
2 weeks after this incident, a man came to the house, and she said, the grandmother reported this story, that he was very nervous, very almost paranoid, looking over his shoulder, looking around, and said, "I have a copy of this photograph. I want you to have a copy." Handed it over to the minister, who he recognized from being there at the crash. And then he took off down the street, and there was an air of fear or paranoia in the town in the aftermath of the crash. No one wanted to be caught talking about it.
No.
So little Charlotte grew up seeing little glimpses of this photograph. It was of an alien that was propped up at the site of this UFO crash by two men, one on each side. And the alien was stretched out with his arms out, and he had a big head, big black eyes, two little dots for nostrils, and a little slit for a mouth. And she remembered this eerie picture. She saw it about 20 times, and then the family lost the photo. And she asked her grandmother in the 1980s, "What was that all about? What's this whole crazy story?" And that's when she got every detail she could.
Do you believe they lost it, or do you think it was destroyed?
It was taken by a neighbor in a small town in Kansas where they were living at the time. A man came over for dinner and said, "Well, I'm a photographic expert. Let me have a look at this picture you're telling me about, and I'll bring it right back." Well, guess who didn't bring it back, and in fact skipped town, and they never saw him again. They trusted this man, and he stole their picture, and they never got a chance to speak with him. He passed away in, I think, around 2010, 2011.
Oh, they knew where this chap had gone.
He disappeared for like 7 decades, and then towards the end, a UFO investigator found this man living in New Mexico, and he gave various evasive answers. Another investigator went to talk with him, and he said this man was very difficult to pin down on anything. At first would deny he saw the picture, deny he took the picture, and then, well, I had the picture, but I gave it back to them. And it was always some snake oil story that he was trying to feed them, and then he passed away.
Wow. Well, was there any relatives of that gentleman that told a different story, that why he took it and what that purpose was?
Not that we can find. Once again, this gentleman was in his 90s, and relatives, living relatives, were difficult to find.
Okay.
If any.
Amazing that he was even that you even found him as well. And just before we get into the story, because I know people are dying to hear, well, what the hell's the story, right? Other UFO investigators that have taken an interest in this, just name a few.
Certainly Ryan S. Wood. He has been to Cape Girardeau and done some work, even with a metal detector. Stanton Friedman, for those who are familiar with the UFO community, very famous name. He went to Cape Girardeau, did some research. I know Linda Moulton Howe has done some digging into this and was one of the first people to bring it to the public airwaves through earthfiles.com. She interviewed me in January, and we got to the heart of the matter. And I also got a chance to meet with her in person just a few weeks ago.
Fantastic.
So there's three names for you.
No, fantastic. Great people. Okay. Very time served as well, those people that you've just mentioned. Yeah, well, no, I know Donald Schmidt and Tom Carey, and they did the book, one of the defining Roswell books. And, I don't know whether you'd brush shoulders with them or whether...
I have not met them, but I'm familiar with their work. They've also done a very fine expose. I think it should get more attention on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, where it is very possible some of the Missouri recoveries were taken to in the years after the crash.
I think you guys would get on so well. I really do. Now, obviously, the name Roswell is a name that everyone recognizes. It got such notoriety at that time, but this case did not. And you just have to say to yourself, why not? But before we do, let's get into the story, and then we'll look at some of these questions. So basically, April 12th, 1941, a report of a plane crash. Let's take it from there.
That's correct. It was I believe, Saturday evening, the night before Easter Sunday here in America. And Pastor Huffman got a call from someone and rushed out of the house. And when he came back at close to midnight, he was pale and shaken. And the family wanted to know what is going on. And he said, I'll tell you this story once and I'll never tell it again. Someone called me affiliated with the police department in Cape Girardeau and said there's been an airplane crash outside of town. Can you go help minister to the victims and their families? So without further ado, he grabbed his hat and his Bible and left the house with someone in an unmarked car. Was not in uniform. And they went about 12 miles outside of Cape Girardeau in the dark of night. This was just after sunset. I would estimate sometime between 7:30 and 8:30 when the crash occurred. And the phone call, he was probably one of the last people called to go to the site, sometime between 8:30 and 9:15, but we'll say he left the house around 9 o'clock at night. Well, when the police associate and Reverend Huffman finally arrived in the countryside in the darkness, they saw a fire blazing and cars and knew this was the farm. It was supposed to be an airplane crash with a fireball attached. That was the original call to the Cape Girardeau Fire Department. And in those days, the fire department shared their facility with the police department. So that made for a quick response by the fire personnel and Cape Police Department. And I believe it's likely they also called hospital physicians, which would probably be the first thing you would call, wouldn't you? If you know there's a plane crash and victims needing medical care. Perhaps nurses as well, and perhaps the county sheriff. And when Reverend Huffman got out of his car, he noticed these individuals already at the crash scene, men in uniform. Firemen were fighting this blaze all around, not an airplane, but a circular disc made of silver metal, and it was damaged, blown open with debris, silvery shrapnel all around the ground. And this strange fire that had not burned or singed the craft or the victims, which there were only 3. He looked in amazement and had to have been astounded when he found that all of the victims were identical, small, 4 feet at the tallest, thin, rubbery-legged, armed alien beings. There's almost no way to put it other than they were from another world. They all had identical, huge balloon-shaped heads, big black eyes, little nostrils, and a little slit for a mouth, and crinkled up skin, which may have reacted to the oxygen-rich atmosphere of our planet, which they obviously could not breathe. Pastor Huffman said he found 2 of them side by side in the grass and was told they were pulled from the wreckage by someone. A third one was not far away, and that he was gasping for breath. His chest was barely going up and down. He was still alive when Pastor Huffman knelt over him and felt quite helpless and tried to say a few prayers, and as he did, that creature expired. He went motionless, and there was never a sound out of him. Whether this creature communicated before he got there to any first responder in the crowd, I do not know. I would sure like to know. But it's certainly possible either through verbal communication, or I've heard in other crash stories, mental communication, telepathy. But in this case, I have not heard of that. Also in the crowd during this event were two news photographers snapping these big speed graphic camera flash pictures, which would illuminate, just flash right up and open the crash for viewing because it would illuminate the scene. And one of the men said, "Hold that creature up, let me take a photograph," and he pulled out a small pocket camera, which supposedly was a Kodak Brownie camera. And he had two men pick up an alien and pose for a picture. And he took that snapshot and he tucked the camera back in his pocket. Shortly after all of this, there were new people who arrived on the scene, and they were in uniforms. It was the United States Army, and they were none too pleased by what was going on. They surrounded the site and hemmed it in and said, frankly, you didn't see this. This never happened. This is a matter of national security. You are never to speak about this now or ever in the rest of your lives. And you hand over the shrapnel, the debris, all camera film, your notes, any evidence that you may think you can keep, you cannot. And so everyone did as they were told and were quite intimidated, as you naturally would be. Reverend Huffman said that he saw the army surrounding the site, and a soldier took him off to one side and said, "You must swear silence on this." Maybe he used his Bible to swear it on. And he said after that, he was so unnerved, he and the police officer got back in their car and drove back into Cape Girardeau and eventually made it back to the Huffman home, pale and shaken, as any one of us would be. The most astounding event of your life you can imagine.
Absolutely incredible. Now, was that normal for the military to be so quickly, placed there in a sense?
Yeah. I get that response also. And here's the connection. The sheriff of Cape Girardeau County was a man named Reuben Shoddy. His own brother was part of the Army Aerial Training Facility in nearby Sikeston, Missouri. So he undoubtedly called his brother and said, "Look what we have here." In fact, it was Easter weekend, Passover, Easter weekend. The brothers could have gone to the site together since it was a time off for many people. So at that point, a quick call to the Sikeston Aerial Training Center would have produced Captain Root, his name was Burton Root, I believe his name was. And he was in charge of the Army Aerial Training Facility and had come directly from Washington, D.C., where he knew great, powerful people there. So this is how the Army could have acted so quickly, just a matter of phone calls, assemble a crew and take them up the road about 30 or 40 miles from nearby Sikeston, Missouri, and arrive by, let's say, 9:30 or 10 o'clock that night, within maybe 2 to 3 hours of the actual crash. It is fast reaction, but it does make sense.
Incredible. Incredible that base was there as well, because this was war, wasn't it? This was World War II era.
Well, England was involved in World War II. America had not committed other than the Lend-Lease Act, which happened in the previous month. Also, Cape Girardeau was home to a National Guard armory, where one person who served there in 1906 was named Harry S. Truman, who became the eventual president of the United States, despite the fact Franklin Roosevelt did not like Harry Truman, did not support Harry Truman in the 1940 election, and eventually did a complete 180 and had Harry Truman placed on the ticket as the number 2 man in the 1944 election.
Oh my gosh, he was at that base as well.
He trained at that base in 1906. Harry was in Washington, D.C. at the time of the crash.
Yeah, sorry, Washington, D.C., but there was a lot of power that surrounded him, though, wasn't there?
Yes, he was preparing to hold very high-powered hearings about military spending just within a few days of the crash, and one of his first witnesses would be General George Marshall, who was a head of the Army, was Franklin Roosevelt's number 1 man he would go to on the night of the crash, I'm quite sure. Eventually, memorandums have been leaked from Franklin Roosevelt showing that General Marshall was, quote, in control of the disposition of the celestial wonders that have come to us. They put it rather artfully, but you can tell the Army, under the direction of General Marshall, had control of the spaceship crash material.
Right. Okay. So to put this in a time context as well, this was just before, well, maybe a couple of years, but maybe a year before Pearl Harbor as well.
Yes, Pearl Harbor happened December of 1941.
Sorry.
So the crash happened in April.
That's right. So it was the same year. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so that's not too far away from that major event taking place, which brought America into the war then as well. Now, just going back to the craft, did they get to see inside the craft as well? How big was this craft?
I am not sure. I've never heard a figure, but I've never heard it described as huge or it was tiny. So I assume it was moderately sized, maybe 100 feet across at the most. However, Reverend Huffman told his family, yes, I did get to peek inside the craft, and he saw plenty. He got quite an eyeful, and I'll tell you what he said, because we all want the meat of the matter. Let's hear what it was about. He peeked into the interior of the ship and saw that it didn't seem to have many rooms, just basically a flight deck, or cockpit, as we would call it today, with 3 small seats like you would have for those of children, really. 2 or 3 seats, actually. And a kind of dashboard with gauges and dials and knobs and such. And there was a silver band around the interior of the cockpit with strange symbols that he could not recognize, what we might call today hieroglyphics almost. He didn't understand quite what he was looking at. Obviously, it did not compare to any aircraft he'd ever seen. There were no wings, propellers, exhaust shaft, or anything like that. This was shortly before the Army showed up, when Reverend Huffman got his big look at it.
Right.
There is a smaller story I'll pass along quickly. Is a Cape Girardeau fireman was dying of cancer and told his family that whole Reverend Huffman story you've heard about, that story is absolutely true. He said, I ought to know. I was there. I was fighting the flames. I saw the bodies, which were not damaged outwardly. Just as Reverend Huffman said, there were no singe or burn marks or obvious wounds or injuries on these creatures. There was no singeing or burning of the craft itself. The fireman said he helped put out the flames and that the Army did indeed come in and take over. And what was rather embarrassing is the fireman got caught trying to take a piece of debris and stick it in his pocket and sneak it home, and the Army caught him and kicked him out of the site. And he felt afterwards that his telephone was tapped and that he was being watched around Cape Girardeau to see if he would take any acts of vengeance or start talking openly to people about what he saw.
So and yeah, that's interesting now, this, because why have these people not spoken? Now, if we go back to this time, it was a time when, there was a lot going on. There was a lot of secretive pro-Nazi, pro-Hitler types, maybe, because I say that because when I'm reading your book, there was a local FBI office that had opened up, and it's unusual for an FBI office to open up. Now, probably the residents at the time didn't know what that was all about, except for what they had spoke about that they were looking into. You'll have to fill the words in here because I can't quite remember what it said in the book.
You've cleverly hit upon a very key part of the story that other people have missed. 1 month before the crash, the FBI found so much espionage and sabotage in the Cape Girardeau area, they opened up a field office in Cape Girardeau. It's the first we'd ever had in our town. And this means that there were some problems with people probably affiliated with pro-Nazi and pro-Hitler sentiment, if not espionage, spy rings, in other words. Cape Girardeau did have a large German population in those days. In fact, I'm told one church in Cape Girardeau actually had a service all in German to appeal to the German community. So out of those people, I'm sure just a small handful, perhaps, were pro-Nazi and were stirring up trouble. And we had manufacturing plants in Cape Girardeau. Apparently there were incidents of sabotage, and this is all before the crash. So now it makes more sense for Reverend Huffman to have said, I saw an FBI agent or two at the crash scene. Now it makes more sense. It's very adept of you to pick up on that.
So let's get this right as well. That also, see, I've had this conversation with the Roswell chaps, with Donald Schmidt as well, that there was a lot of Freemasons surrounding the Roswell crash, and there's nothing to say that there was any involvement there. But in the sense of the involvement of the covering of the secrets, to cover a secrecy like this, it's almost like it's there's a higher calling to cover it. And if these people were Freemasons, in a sense, some of the firemen, some of the police that were involved, that's what military involved, and maybe even some other of the townsfolk that were involved, the Masons would be able to keep a secret, surely.
Well, you've astutely hit on another problem with the story. To keep these layers of secrecy bound around it, Freemasons were very common and powerful in our country in 1941 and in Cape Girardeau at the city level. The man I mentioned earlier, Rush Limbaugh I, was a very ardent, devout former congressman who was a Freemason. His son was wild about aviation, hung around the Cape airport, took pilot lessons, and became a pilot in World War II. And I feel that Rush Limbaugh II probably knew what happened. And just to divert just a bit, Rush Limbaugh was asked on his radio show around 2006 by a caller, "Rush, what is up with this Cape Girardeau UFO story, in your hometown?" And instead of saying, "Well, this is a lot of nonsense, get this off my show," he said, "There's actually more to this story than you might think." Then he moved on to the next caller, and he did not want to discuss it. But in 1941, the president was a Freemason. Vice President Henry Wallace was a Freemason, very devout, both of them 33-degree members. The Speaker of the House in America was a very devout Freemason working out of the Capitol building. Harry Truman was the Grand Master Freemason of all Missouri, the state of Missouri. And J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, was also a Freemason. And there were many congressmen and many people in government in those days who were Freemasons. And in the Cape Girardeau level, I know of a few, including the man who ran the local radio station, who may have sent a reporter out that night. I'd like to know more about that. But once again, he would have muzzled the story if asked also.
Well, yeah, because going back to Roswell, I mean, it became public knowledge pretty quick. But then, in this case, it never made it to any national news or anything. I mean, it just...
Yeah, in the Roswell case, someone foolishly set up a press release saying, "We finally captured a UFO,
That's right.
a flying saucer." But not in the Missouri case. They said, "Give back your notes, give back your photos and film. You are not to write about this. You're not to discuss this." It's interesting to know that the publisher of the Cape Girardeau newspaper was a bit of a friend to Harry Truman. He must have been. He went to the Harry Truman White House twice in the 1940s. And Harry Truman came to Cape Girardeau and visited with this publisher at the time in the 1960s twice. And both times he said, "Okay, the press can take pictures of us. Now you're going to leave the room, and this publisher and I are going to speak of something. We can't tell you what it is." And when the meeting was over, closed-door meeting, Harry Truman came out and said, "I'm sorry, we can't discuss what it is that we were hobnobbing about behind closed doors." But it gives you further incentive to believe that this newspaper editor knew the story and sat on it at the time and wanted to know more about it in the years to come for his own private curiosity. That is my assumption. I think it's a fairly logical one.
Incredible. Yeah, okay. And you did actually check you were able to check the fire log for the fire brigade. They had their logs archived somewhere, and just tell us what you found in the logs.
Well, I went to the Cape Girardeau Fire Department and checked with City Hall, and they said, "Well, all our records are lost. Those were lost in transit, or we digitized them and tossed them out long ago." But there is a Cape Girardeau fire log that shows the response calls, and the afternoon of Saturday, April 12th, should have included one that made the front page of the paper. It was a grass fire in Cape Girardeau, and the fire department had a little accident in the street on their way to that fire. That fire did not get responded to, or was responded to, but was not logged in the fire log, and neither was anything else about any plane crash or UFO crash. As instructed, they were told, "This did not happen. You will not write about this or insert it into a log." So those the days before and the days after the 12th, it is mysteriously awfully quiet, shall we say.
Right. Yes, of course it was quiet. Yeah, absolutely. Where is the farm now?
I cannot disclose its exact location, but the farm is still there. I know where it is. We can't have their security, ruined by disclosing on the air and having every Tom, Dick, and Harry show up demanding the proof. Plus, I don't want to get sued, so that would be handy for me to keep my mouth shut. Another factor while we're going over how this story could be so shackled at the time is, remember, we had an American president who was handicapped in a wheelchair and allowed no film footage, no cameras, no photographs to be taken. You're never to discuss the fact that Franklin Roosevelt suffers from polio, and he can barely even stand up. The press was completely muzzled through all of the 1930s and 40s, the fact that the president had this very serious medical condition and was much worse than the American people ever thought. And also, it was completely muzzled that the president no longer had relations, shall we say, with Eleanor. They slept in separate bedrooms, even had separate homes. And they did spend time in the White House together, but they often rarely met. They did not communicate well. They weren't getting along. And yet everyone thought of the First Lady and the president as a happy couple, because the press was told, you will not report this. The president has the occasional girlfriend, supposedly, and had an affair in the 1920s. And once again, this was just a different era where you did not discuss these matters in public whatsoever, or the full weight of the FDR administration would come down on you, probably through the apparatus of the FBI led by J. Edgar Hoover, who was frankly concealing his own secrets about his own personal life. It was a very unique and interesting period that's been the subject of many books and movies over the years, and rightfully so.
At the time then, were there any strange lights or activity in the sky prior to this event?
That's another good question. The crash happened a little south of Cape, and I've been told they have had, over the decades, strange lights, orbs, lights flashing across the sky at night, but no great, very clear, definite crash, sighting of a disk or something. Certainly no crash prior to the main crash. And I'm wondering now if there had been a really strong sighting with a photograph, let's say in the 1930s or 1940, would that have made the newspapers in those days? I don't know. I don't know how that would have been treated in the period before the crash. Certainly after the crash, they would not have discussed it. Everyone was too frightened.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I wonder when Roswell happened, if they were more prepped for such an event.
According to some reports that I've seen, a military crew, the Army, really, Army intelligence, swooped down on Roswell, New Mexico area, and they scooped up all the evidence and browbeat people into saying nothing happened, or you didn't see this, you're not to speak of this. They moved very swiftly, and the answer could be that they were trained for this operation by way of the Cape Girardeau incident 6 years earlier. They were prepared. General Marshall of the Army had a special interplanetary phenomena unit, IPU, he called it, and that was probably what descended upon Roswell so quickly and handled that crash incident, although they did let slip originally someone affiliated with the Roswell base that, hey, we found a flying saucer, and that was muzzled and changed very quickly.
For the people that were there at the site, this would have been life-changing on a personal level and also a spiritual, religious level as well, because at that time it would have it would have really upset their religious beliefs, maybe, that such things exist.
You would think so. Certainly Reverend Huffman was said by his family to have gotten quieter. He was not a talkative man to start with, but he got quieter, and that he became more introspective and open to the great mysteries of life. And he was a Christian pastor who was familiar with maybe some of the more otherworldly stories of the Bible. But I should imagine that you're quite correct. People who were there at the scene, this had to have been a total shock for them. First, the crash and seeing the bodies. And second, the Army coming in and making sure, you will never speak of this. We're quite serious. You're not to talk of this ever again. So it had to have affected their lives for a long time to come.
And isn't it strange, isn't it, that that whoever these visitors were, they came all this way potentially, unless they came dimensionally, and they crashed all this way with top of the range technology, and it crashes. Well, I wonder what, was there anything for Roswell? There was a storm at that particular time when it
heard that, yes. In Cape Girardeau, it had been a particularly unusually windy spring, and that weekend was unusually warm. Our temperatures in our hometown were in the upper 80s, mid 80s during the day, and in the 70s at night for Easter, April 12th. That was very unusually warm and windy. Now, if you're from another world and you're trying to take what appeared to be a scout ship, a reconnaissance ship, a small craft, and it's lightweight apparently, and you're trying to negotiate America's topographical geography and our wind currents, the pull of electromagnetic gravity and whatever solar radiation there is. There were a whole bunch of factors to take into account where you could see extraterrestrials who were not well prepared could have had pilot error, mechanical error, or weather-related mishap. Just like anyone flying an airplane today in our world, we still have crashes.
This is true. And just remind us what they look like as well. I mean, I believe from what the book said, they were wearing some sort of tight-fitting suits.
It's possible. It's difficult to tell from Charlotte Huffman Mann's description. She seemed at times to think that maybe they were wearing a tight-fitting outfit, or that their skin had simply crinkled up and was just, hugging their skeletal structure a little more, because they were not supposed to be outside this climate-controlled craft. And they may well have had a physical reaction laying there in our oxygen-rich atmosphere. And goodness knows if anyone did anything to them, like tried to apply oxygen mask to their face or poured water on them or anything like that. I don't know if that happened, but that could also have affected their skin. And they certainly had these remarkably long, thin arms and legs, 3 fingers on each hand, 1 long thumb. And if you ever are on YouTube, you might take a look at a video called Skinny Bob, which is a 1942 KGB Russian film of an alien that matches the description of the 1941 alien perfectly. I don't know if it was the same race, the same being, or if it was somehow a hoax someone has rigged up. But the Skinny Bob video you might want to look at from 42 matches this alien race described on the ground in Cape Girardeau just immaculately.
Prior to doing this book, what was your beliefs on this subject?
I was somewhat interested as a boy on the topic, and I feel that God did not create man alone, that the universe is very vast and full of all kinds of creation, civilization perhaps, and even advanced civilizations. And so in reviewing this story, my beliefs are reinforced even more.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really make much sense for God to create just us in a universe that's infinitive, and to get that understanding in your head, infinitiveness. I can't. It does bring up options.
In today's world, we have scientists, botanists, and zoologists who leave their home office and their lab, and they may fly to another state or another continent and observe nature and wildlife and take samples and record, and then go back to their office and their lab and discuss with their superiors what they found. Why should it be any different for an alien race of advanced beings to go to another planet if they are ever able to traverse time and space, perhaps through a wormhole or another dimension, as you wisely pointed out, and come here and observe one of the most fascinating races of all, the human race, which was in the midst of World War II, and we were at the very conception of the atomic era as people were working on the atom bomb. And this whole crazy era of nuclear age we have today was just in its birth pangs in 1941. So it really makes sense for any advanced race to come here and observe some of the madness going on the planet. The Japanese were running amok in the Pacific Theater, and as you in England know, Hitler and his troops were overrunning Europe and threatening to destroy England to get you to capitulate and surrender, and happily, you did not do so.
Well, not without America, we wouldn't have won the war. There's no way. It was together that we did. Can you imagine the madness of what they must have observed? Imagine it nowadays. The local elections, they'll see some madness there as well. I think we've always been a bit of a mad society in a sense, but, it does make you think, why come here? Well, like you say, observing and looking and potentially, some say that there's a potential that they seeded life here. It's possible. It's possible. For what purpose? Who knows? Maybe that's their God aspect of what they go out there and do once you've passed the monetary systems and other issues that we currently have, and technology
I have
as well.
no idea if it's true, but what if these were just like teenagers out for a joyride, thumbing their nose at their parents and saying, "We're going to take the craft out for a little tour"?
What if? Yeah. What if? Yeah. Well, we both mentioned the word now, interdimensional, and it's possible that that's where they've come from as well. Not the idea of what we used to think of, long space travel, but maybe dimensional travel. We don't really understand this aspect of this right now, but yet there may be another way, another framework that we've just barely considering.
I'm certainly not an expert, but I do know science is looking more and more seriously into interdimensional levels of existence, and that some people think that an alien race, if they do not live within a dimension, could use dimensions to travel through the physical cosmos. But we're still, I'm afraid, at a learning stage. The human race is still trying to figure it all out.
Yeah, absolutely. And in your book, you do talk about, you do touch upon the aspects of the craft being scientifically examined, and with the craft's propulsion system applied to U.S. nuclear weapons program at the time. Did that craft excel us in technology that we wouldn't have had elsewhere, and it helped us with nuclear technology in a sense, perhaps potentially the key to the nuclear bomb?
We would all certainly like to see a lot more proof, but there are little hints and allegations that I include in my book. And the leader of this project in America was Dr. Vannevar Bush, who was supposed to be cooperating with your British scientists as of like early 1942, when America was learning more and more about what was in this spacecraft, perhaps an atomic propulsion system. It's interesting to know that Dr. Bush began stalling and not cooperating with British scientists. And it seems clear from the FDR memos that I've included in the book that FDR really did not care to share this information. He wanted to be America's great secret weapon, and he wanted it applied into our atomic know-how, as he probably seen and read. And according to a 1947 report on the Roswell incident, the atomic know-how was applied to the Manhattan Project. And it's just an staggering thought that this alien technology helped finish off or complete the atom bomb, and it's at a loss other than neutronic propulsion device within it.
Well, even to the point where if it wasn't that, what about the transistor at the time?
Yeah, transistors were being brought up to speed for the war effort, as so many else was.
I mean, it went from the valve to the sort of semiconductor type of transistor. I mean, that was an amazing leap. That in heat effectiveness, speed, and everything. Who knows? I mean, did Bell Laboratories, was some of this technology fed to companies that were working on technology that was at the bare basics of understanding of what it may have been, but put into companies where it wouldn't have seemed like it came from nowhere then. So
it would have been a clever move to do so. It's so tough to get proof and pin down. Once again, a long time ago, documents destroyed, top secret, you will not discuss this.
But then you did come across a story about someone going into the vaults of the not White House, but you can explain the story, but the underground chambers, and actually got to see bodies and a craft, and potentially this could have been connected to this Missouri crash.
Just when you think the story cannot get any stranger or wilder, it does. In the 1990s, two elderly sisters gave public interviews for the first time and said, "This is what our father told us." Our father was also a Christian pastor, and he went to Washington, D.C. He was the cousin of Cordell Hull, the famous Secretary of State who worked directly for Franklin Roosevelt. Cordell Hull said, I want to show you something. You have to be sworn to secrecy first. Promise me you won't talk about this. So on the steps of the United States Capitol building, Pastor Turner Holt swore he would not speak of it. Naturally, he broke that in the years after the incident. But Cordell Hull took Reverend Holt down many flights of stairs down underneath the Capitol building, and there really are sub-basement floors about 7 stories below the Capitol, which was designed and created under the influence of Freemason George Washington in the 1780s. Well, Reverend Holt said to his daughters, I was astounded to find Cordell Hull showed me a crashed spaceship. It was round, it was metal, it had been broken open, it had been damaged. Part of it was held under a tarp, and Cordell Hull encouraged me to take my hand and lift it up and see how heavy it is. And to his surprise, Reverend Holt said it was quite lightweight. And he said he looked over, and there were 3 glass jars containing 3 alien creatures matching the description of the Cape Girardeau crash perfectly. They were undamaged in any way. They were not singed or burned, had no external injuries. They were the same big-headed, big black-eyed, 4 feet tall creatures swimming around, well, laying there, not alive, in clear formaldehyde in these jars. And Turner Holt said, Cordell Holt told me, these are creatures from another world. We cannot talk about this publicly. You're not to discuss this. But we're afraid that it might somehow start a panic, and we are examining these things, and it's just something I thought I would get your reaction to as a man of the cloth. And so Turner Holt told his daughters that this really happened. I'm quite serious, and it was something astounding that I cannot forget, and I really feel the need to get it off my chest and tell you that we are not alone, and I've seen the evidence for myself.
How annoyed do you get sometimes, or frustrated, when you know the truth because of the evidence that you've collected? You're not here to convince anyone. You can't convince anyone. But it's just so annoying. It's so hurtful and annoying and just crazy that we won't release this information. But I wonder why we won't release it. What?
I have to believe that either our government is a little paranoid and power hungry and loves keeping secrets and to examine these things and to infuse the technology we found into various technologies today, or it's possible they know something we don't know, and it's frightening, and it's best to keep society going along as it does and not talk about these things. Now, I know Hillary Clinton is currently running for office, said just the other day in a radio interview, if I get to be president, I'm really going to look into the UFO issue, try to get these files opened up and discuss what we've all been hearing rumors of and seeing in our skies. And it's going to come out if I can get elected, says Hillary, but we'll just see about that.
Do you believe that?
I believe she will genuinely give it a try. Apparently, Bill Clinton gave it a bit of a try when he was president and didn't get too far, and I should imagine that Hillary will probably be stonewalled as well.
Yeah. I remember Obama's was asked on a talk show in America. I think, was it Jimmy Kimmel or something like that, about UFOs, and it was just a complete brush off, wasn't it? It was just, He
didn't want to discuss it. And also, President Carter promised when he was running for office in 1976, if I'm elected, I will get all that UFO information out there, because I know I saw one in 1969, and he filed a report at that time.
Yeah.
Well, as soon as he took office and got some information from NASA and some other people, suddenly, snapshot. He will not discuss it and just says, well, they won't tell me, or something very flippant, and there goes the issue again.
Who knows? Maybe NASA doesn't know too much, except they have, there is departments that know bits. Maybe there is craft constantly spotted, but it's just ignored because there's no evidence of what it really is, and there's no point to cause mass panic. Who really knows the truth of what's being covered up, what's not? But thank God for people like yourself who take the torch and actually, write a decent book like this and put the facts together. Now, do you have a website?
I have a website. It's called www.mo41.info. And I have a Facebook page called Cape Girardeau's 1941 UFO Crash, America's First, which I feel it really was.
Okay.
I enjoy doing the Facebook page more than the website. I'm a little different from other people, I guess.
Absolutely.
I get people writing in now and then, and
Good.
not too long ago, I got a message from a person who said, "Did you know there was a second crash site at the night of the big event?" And I said, "No, can you tell me about this?" And he said, "Well, I don't know a whole lot, but he gave me the general location, and something small came down." And when I was discussing this with Linda Moulton Howe, she said, "I heard the same thing at Roswell, that there was a second site that night because the aliens had a what you would call an escape pod that came down during the plummet to Earth. A small escape pod came down, and she speculated that this could have been what the secondary crash site in Cape Girardeau could have been. I have no proof whatsoever, but it's an interesting theory, and it could be quite possible."
Incredible. Absolutely incredible, isn't it? Wow.
Yeah, it's incredible. And what's more frustrating, I know you're frustrated by this case, and I am too, but the secondary site came down in an area that is wealthy people's homes. There's some farm property. It's private property, no trespassing, video surveillance, keep out. There's no way I can get in there and poke around. It's going to be difficult to access. And it's just like, here's another dead end to knock my head into.
Well, unless we send the drone in.
That's interesting, but that can't take metal detection readings and radiation such, as we really need to do a proper dig of the site.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and a final message to the audience as well. What would you... Well, actually, before I ask the final message, is there any TV shows that have took an interest in your case?
Besides The Secret Evidence That We Are Not Alone in 2002 on the Sci-Fi Channel, History Channel show called MUFON Hangar 1 also spent about 2 or 3 minutes on the Cape Girardeau crash, and I think in 2014, and that gets repeated every now and then, but no one's done anything more than 2 or 3 minutes on this. I have been told some television producers are interested in my book and will be contacting me fairly soon. Like to hear from them, but if they do, we'll get together one of the biggest blockbuster stories of all time, I feel.
Absolutely. And what would you say is an important message to the audience in this case?
Well, that's a good question. We've been over some materials and we've discussed aspects of the case and what it could have been, other than I think it's a fairly good bet we are being observed by at least one race, probably a number of them, who come here and find us quite fascinating. And then they use the Star Trek Prime Directive. If you've ever seen the TV show or the movie Star Trek, they go from planet to planet, world to world, but they're not really allowed to communicate and get themselves involved in the culture of the planet, which they normally ignore that rule and proceed to have an adventure on that planet anyway. But I think that the Prime Directive is probably what most alien civilizations observe when they come to Earth. They take a look around, maybe take a few samples of plants and animals, and unfortunately, possibly a human abduction for testing, and then put them back. And we are being watched and observed as we go through the madness of the 20th and now 21st century. Our technology boom, whereas maybe 150 years ago, many of us were living in log cabins out in the country. Now we have a great high-tech society. And it's just fascinating to them, as I'm sure it would be.
Oh, I'm sure it was. I mean, for us to even be able to do this right now, to have this video communication free of charge, and to be able to put this out on the internet for everyone to watch and not need a TV network company to worry about, it is incredible how quickly things have changed. So yes, I agree with everything you've said there, and it's watch this space. Yeah, watch this space. Well, Paul, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure, and I'd love to get you back on in the future. Thank you.
Well, I thank you for having me on, and I hope all of England gets a chance to read my book and make me incredibly wealthy. That's not really the point. And, in fact, the truth is I have not received one dime from this book so far. So okay. I just thank you again, Kevin.
Well, we've come to an end on tonight's show. Don't forget that you can listen and watch all our past interviews on The More Show's official YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new daily shows. You may also find out more on all past and upcoming guests on themoreshow.co.uk, and do like us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. So until next time, be safe.